Hello, I'm David Prosser, the Stratford Festival's literary and editorial director. Welcome to our second virtual Meet the Festival. So glad you were able to join us. We're going to be talking to some members of the cast of Coriolanus, the Robert Lepage production that began streaming last night. I will introduce briefly our special guests. I guess I'll do it in order of how they appear on the screen, at least on my screen. So top left-hand corner, give a wave when I mention you. Tom Rooney, who plays Sicinius. 11 seasons with us. There's nothing that Tom can't do, actually. He's stunned audiences with his versatility. 2014, he was the lead in Man of La Mancha, unleashed a singing voice that blew us all away. And as Zangler and Crazy for You, he gave what I still maintain is the funniest drunk scene in all of theatrical history. And he does Shakespeare and he does Moliere. We have next to me, I guess, Alexis Gordon, who played Virgilia in Coriolanus. She was last with us in 2018, I believe, which was her fourth festival season. And in that year, she also played Ceres in The Tempest and the neighbor in Napoli Milionaria. Made a stunning debut with us in 2014 as Julie Jordan in Carousel. Went on to play Anne Edgerman in A Little Night Music, Sarah Brown in Guys and Dolls. Next, we have Graham Abbey. Give us a wave, Graham, playing Phidias. 21 festival seasons. Graham's chalked up a long list of leading roles. Last year, he had us in Stitches with a brilliant comic performance as Frank Ford in The Merry Wives of Windsor. And in 2017, he was an equally hilarious Orgon in Tartuffe. He also, last season, of course, directed The Front Page. Then we have Coriolanus himself, Andre Sills. Give him a wave. Yeah. Besides giving that powerhouse performance in the title role of Coriolanus, I think that was his fifth season. And that same year, he was Sebastian in The Tempest. He was also in Napoli Milionaria. Andre's also worked with the Shaw Festival and Obsidian Theatre. And earlier this year, in what now seems like a different world, he played Casca in a production of Julius Caesar for Crow's Theatre in Toronto. And Mark Antony was played by Graham Abbey. So those two have crossed swords in ancient Rome before. Then we have Michael Blake, played Cominius in Coriolanus. Michael was with us last week, along with other members of the cast of King Lear. He was the Duke of Albany. Last season, of course, he gave us that incredible performance as Othello, as well as playing George Page in The Merry Wives of Windsor and Diamond Louis in The Front Page. We're going to see him again as Macduff in next week's film of the Scottish play. And then the week after that, in our film series, we'll get to enjoy his amazing performance as Caliban in our 2018 production of The Tempest. I think that's them all. Yes, everyone's accounted for. Welcome to you all. Thank you all for participating in this.
Hello, David. How are you?
Good. How are you? The way we're going to do this, I'm going to squint at the screen as questions come in from you guys out there watching this. If you're watching this on YouTube, obviously the trick here is you have to sign in, I believe, to YouTube. That enables you to type in questions where it says say something, and those questions will get relayed to me by the miracle of technology, and we will endeavor to have our actors answer them. This just in, I'm learning that we already have joining us in the audience guests, viewers from Winnipeg, from Portland, Oregon, from Manitoulin Island, from Arlington, Virginia, from Toronto, Columbus, Ohio, San Francisco, Bay Area, and Detroit. So this is going out across the continent and possibly beyond. So can I start then, just to warm us up with maybe a question that I will direct to each of you in turn. I saw some rehearsals for the show, and then of course I saw the show in the theater, and I saw it again last night. One of the most extraordinary moments, actually, is when you come to the curtain call and you suddenly see this blank, bare stage after a couple of hours of being immersed in these amazing visual images. And I'm just curious to know at what point for each of you did you, in other words, was there a moment, an aha moment or an oh my God moment when you suddenly realized what Robert was going to do with this? Or were you really aware of it right from the start, what it was going to look like, what the effect was going to be? Can I just ask each of you in turn, starting with you, maybe Andre, since you had the bulk of this show to do?
Um, well, for me, I guess it starts back to the first workshop. Um, and I remember my first workshop, there was one that happened prior to me joining the team. And like, I remember when I was cast and then showing up in Quebec City and looking at the stage that they had there. And I was looking at it and I was like, and I wondered, I don't think we're actually getting up on our feet, because looking at the stage didn't look like there was enough space on the stage to do Coriolanus. So I was like, oh, okay, we're just doing some table work. We're going to read through the play. We're going to talk about it a whole bunch. And we read it once and then we got on our feet, which was my nightmare. But from day one, starting to see all of those visuals coming into effect was pretty impressive in regards to all of the different locations that Robert had planned to have every scene in. And then jumping forward to when we were in Stratford, putting the final touches on the whole thing, having some people watch the show, actually commenting that they felt like they're being in a movie. So us coming out for the curtain call was great to let people know that we were actually doing the show and not something that we had pre-filmed. And actually still there in the theater with them. We may have been slightly removed from the audience a little bit and elevated a little bit more than usual on the Avon, but it was really cool to kind of play with the minds of the audiences and make them wonder what they were actually watching and if it was real or if it was not.
Graham, what was it like for you? Was there any particular moment where you went, good grief, this is amazing?
Probably day one in Quebec. What's amazing about the way Robert works that I've never been a part of before, and that is usually when we take a play from page to stage, you have a sequence, you rehearse these things in a hall, and you slowly add elements, light, sound, as you approach tech. Robert does this all at once from day one. So the process really is that we were working a script, and as Andre said, we would go away, we'd come back, and this entire team had built a set in, a rudimentary set very quickly, and we were on stage as Robert is adding sound and light. So it's a testament to his work as a creator, because he's able to do this all at once. He's able to create the finished piece as a sort of moving element from day one. And I've never certainly been a part of that as an actor. It was extraordinary to be in and witness, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely was like a once in a lifetime, very unique experience. Exactly. I'll reiterate what both of those guys said in terms of you felt as though he wanted to you read the scene and then he wanted you to be in the scene right away and play inside of that scene. So as actors, like Graham said, and Andre, we build towards that. We do a lot of talking sometimes, and then to just dive in, you had to make choices. So your instinct as an actor had to jump in immediately and try stuff. And as he would watch you, he would come and whisper and give you little ideas and whatnot, just to build it a little bit further, but not like locking anything in. And he knew sort of when his eye, when it all came together, and he was very good at. You sort of you gave your trust over to his process, definitely. Certainly, I felt that way. I went okay, man, like this guy knows what he's doing, because you saw this efficiency and this clarity of a vision, and he would let you in on it.
Yeah.
You didn't. He wasn't keeping it away from you, but he wanted you to bring a bit of yourself, and vice versa, and wanted to meet on the stage. At least that's what I got from it.
Well, Alexis, what was it like for you? Did you have a revelatory moment?
It was challenging, but it was really neat to go from, I mean, when we were in the actual season, I think we had 2.5 weeks with him, and then he left for 2 months. So we were thrown onto the stage essentially and introduced with all of the wardrobe, costume, set elements, and then it was removed for 2 months. So that actually proved the biggest challenge, to have it and then get it taken away. And we had to find the play what it was for us again, without all the support of the beautiful backgrounds that we got, the car, everything, those beautiful technical elements that it felt like we were locked into, like Lego pieces, was removed. So we were like, what is the show without that? Which I think was kind of this neat challenge in the middle of it, with the extraordinariness gone. Can we be extraordinary within that by ourselves? Build that up, keep that up, and then be reintroduced, I think it was 2 months later, back into that set, and get those sort of constraints put back on of the slim runway stage before, where we didn't have it.
Yeah, it was like 12 feet wide. Is that right? That you had about a 12-foot deep strip to work in. Am I right about that? Between
I think it's about that. I think it was right before the screen on stage. So from screen to screen, I think there's about 12 feet.
Yeah.
And then there's a lip of the stage that you can, the little platform lip that you can walk on as well.
But there was a moat in between.
The tallest actors in Canada to act on it as well.
Do you remember too, where the screen comes in, there was like a moat. There was like,
Yeah.
not just a line, but a moat that you had to jump over, especially if you were heels.
A long hole in the stage, basically.
Yeah.
Of course, David, when you say that stage goes black at the end, what you also don't see is an amazing crew that backstage was shuffling constantly. You know, the window scene with the Phidias, there were 2 crew members underneath there, literally crawling military style to move the plinth. I mean, it was an amazing morph of actors on stage and crew and members backstage that made that work. It was really an extraordinary, really fine-tuned team.
It was like Tetris backstage. You had to show up backstage at that moment, because you couldn't just listen. You hear the show everywhere backstage in your dressing room, but you couldn't ever watch the show really, because there's so many pieces going on at this. It was an incredible experience to be a part of.
Tom, what was it like for you? Were you just watching in awe, or were you sort of was there a moment for you that was special?
Well, you know, the luxury of working with Robert is that we did have those, as Graham said, we had 2 workshops before. So we had a workshop for a week, I believe, in February the year before in Quebec City. And then in the fall, in November, we had another, I think, 2 weeks. And then we came back in March for the season rehearsal. And we rehearsed for a month then. And what's so wonderful is that he's able to handle all these elements all at the same time. And you just don't feel you're being left alone as an actor. You know, you do feel like he's handling the lights, he's handling the video, he's handling the sound. But at the same time, as Michael said, he comes and he's so detailed as far as the scene work and acting is concerned. So you never feel, even though you are in a painting where there's all kinds of things going on. And as Graham says, there are people, you know, there's 2 bar scenes in Act 2. And in both of those bar scenes, I had a technician crawling on his knees at my feet, you know, but that becomes part of the evening. That becomes part of your reality in some way. And at first it's quite disconcerting. And at first you're acting and pretending that there is no one crawling at your feet trying to cover the lines. But then eventually you start to in some ways enjoy the fact that you are part of this enormous jigsaw puzzle that's going on. And, you know, let's face it, who hasn't been in a bar where someone's not crawling on the ground? You know, we've all been there.
Tom has asked me to do that in future productions, just crawl at his feet on stage.
That's metaphorically.
I think that I'm looking at the questions that have been coming in from viewers, and we now have viewers from from Scotland, from Cape Town, New York. So I'm going to turn to try to catch up with some of those. I think we may have answered the first question, which was about the rehearsal process and how much input or freedom the cast had early on and how you occupy the space with the technology. I think we've heard a bit about that, unless anyone wants to add something to that sense of how.
Just to add to that, well, he was all like Robert being this sort of visionary and this fantastic director. He knew that the script needed to be ours and mold to us. So some directors can be, the word and the text, you hold on to that, and he was willing to. If you felt as though your Cominius could be streamlined a little bit, I went to him late in the process and asked for things to be trimmed, or what does this line, do we need that there? And he was like, let's hear it one more time. And he was so I found him very accessible to work with in terms of just everyone's ideas coming on board and making things as streamlined as possible for yourself and for the piece. It was, yeah.
So did I found it really, it's Robert Lepage, so you wonder, like, okay, is he going to be inaccessible? Like, what is this sort of theater god like? But I found him so open. I'm referred to as gracious silence, and I wondered how far I could push my moments of silence. And he was so open to me attacking Tom Rooney in a restaurant, or like the whole idea of Virgilia being pregnant. I asked him before he left us for the 2 months what he thought of that, and he came back and he said, "Let's throw it in. Let's incorporate it." Like he was open for any sort of let's see how that works. Let's work that in. Okay, like can I add to that? What can we do with that? And what is that actually saying? He was open at every step.
Yeah, what's interesting about Robert is that he as people have said, he's always open to everyone's offering, and even if and he'll always say, okay, well, go ahead, let's try it. And even if it fails, even if it's a horrible idea, his mind is able to see something that might be interesting even in the mess of it. Yeah. And he might say, well, that doesn't really work, but what's interesting about that is this or this. And so he's got an extraordinary mind, and is able to see things that a lot of people don't see, which is so rewarding and fascinating to work with.
And also not too precious about things. Like the one thing that I found interesting about our workshop in November, after we had done it, and then we came back to rehearsals in March, some of the things we did in November, he then switched. So some location changes in regards to where scenes would happen. The big corridor scene, the first time I did it in Quebec City, we were all cramped in the Tribune's office, which was really tiny. And then to come back to it in March, to start in Menenius's office and then go into the corridor, and then like this big old scene, and then the offices come back in, and it is just things like that, just to kind of like let his imagination run wild and give us the opportunity to really play within it. It was an interesting process from the beginning, and also giving yourself the permission, as we're talking about, being thrown into costumes and microphones on day one, to kind of like take the pressure off, give yourself the permission to take the pressure off yourself to not necessarily give a final product right away, because that's what I was feeling on day one for myself. It's like, I'm not ready for this yet, but as soon as you put me in all this stuff and a perfectly built set, you feel like you have to have your final product right away. And I had to give myself the permission to make some mistakes, just feel free to get some things wrong in order to find the right path that we need to go on, because we're still trying to figure out what the whole show was.
So that, I mean, so really, as someone else has asked here, Susan from Florida, I mean, his interactions with you as a cast really was a major part of finishing the final product, right? You were creating this as you would create helping to create this as you would a normal production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that even though there's so much going on, there's such attention to detail in every aspect, in the sound and the video, but also in the acting. Every single moment is talked about and rehearsed, and so it's as I say, you never feel alone.
Yeah. Here's a question that's probably going to occupy us for some time. Please dissect your approach to Phidias and Coriolanus' relationship. Okay, there's the next half hour.
You're going to get into my personal therapy here.
I will throw out the suggestion that they're a kind of tragic version of Beatrice and Benedick, but
wow. Yeah, it's very interesting. I heard
that. Who wants to pick that up? It's going to be either Andre. Well, it's going to be both of you. No one's getting off the hook on this one. But
I mean, I can. This is my second go to Phidias. Actually, I did it years ago with Antony and with Colm doing Coriolanus. So I had this is one of the joys of Shakespeare in a lifetime, that you get a chance to circle back on these parts, because they say you should play them when you're too young, the right age, and too old. I don't know where this one fell for me, but I'll leave that one off. But Phidias, I'm fascinated by that character. I could come back to it a million times. I mean, he, as a lot of Shakespeare's characters do, lives on the threshold between sort of hate and love, and it's an interesting place to walk, and for Phidias, that threshold manifests itself in different ways, in a violent, skin to skin contact battle with his great rival, and then also just tipping it slightly into a visceral, possibly sexual attraction. I mean, and I think for Phidias, Robert had the great idea of adding in Jonathan Sousa, who brilliantly played the lieutenant, who's his associate, which had underpinnings of a relationship as well. And I think he's a man who looks for, who maybe possibly confuses his intensity in certain areas, slips into other ones. But I will say this, I think there's a great love between these two men. How you want to categorize that is sort of up to you and the beauty of Shakespeare. But there's an intense love between these two men. There's an intense respect, and that fuels that play, and it fuels it all the way to that ending, that beautiful, sad ending between these two men who have, Andre and I and Robert obviously talked about this, like there's no other way out for them. They have to get in the car and drive it off that cliff. They can't be politicians. They can't go back to a normal world. They've lived on the field and they've shared so much, and so there's an acknowledgement between the two men of what they are. It's you could go on forever, but.
And I couldn't help thinking every time I saw it that that relationship reaches its final climax on a bed.
Yeah.
I mean, what about Andre? I mean, I think there's clearly between these two characters. Certainly, I think in this production there was at least on Phidias's part, I think there was a very clear kind of homoerotic attraction. I mean, they're obsessed with each other, aren't they? They can't stop talking about each other, but as enemies.
And right off the top, he says once he finds out that Phidias is planning an attack, Coriolanus talks about him. It's like, if he was on my side, I would revolt just so I can face him. And, from the beginning of the process of Robert wanted to cut the first battle scene altogether. And I was like, but no, we need to see them actually going at each other's throats for the first time before Coriolanus shows up at his doorstep. So he made the little child's play moment of Coriolanus's son playing the battle in Coriolanus, which was an interesting version into that battle. But I felt like we needed something, because you got to have that intense hate. You got to show those two guys up against each other, butting heads in real hate, before they come together and have this surprising moment of intimacy. And then so there's 3 points, like the point of the absolute hate, the intimate moment of being united, and the moment at the end of, it's either going to be me or you. So let's figure it out, and let's get down to work, and this is what we want. This is how we always wanted it. So let's battle it out. It's going to be me or you.
And, Phidias has that beautiful line at the end, one of my favorites in the canon, but my rage is gone and I'm filled with sorrow. I mean, and how human is that
yeah.
Many of us know that rage can occupy a space in our hearts and souls. And when it dissipates, what's left, what's under that, and what there is for Phidias is a beautiful sense of loss and love for a man he cared about. So rage occupied that space in battle, and when it faded at the end or abruptly was stopped, something else wells up in him. It's a gorgeous comment on humanity.
Yeah, and actual revenge. Is revenge the thing that you actually want? And when you get it, are you actually filled with happiness? No, you're just left with something else, that the emptiness is still there, basically.
Yeah, revenge never seems to work well in Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Here's a question, and there's so much more we could say about this relationship, and especially about the, as Andre, you mentioned, that first battle scene, which is done with the child. I mean, that raises all kinds of questions for me. With Coriolanus as maybe someone who never quite grew up, and those toys reappear, of course, as sort of strategic symbols when they're planning real battles. But also, of course, I think it feeds into that moment where Phidias calls you boy.
Boy, yeah.
Right? Where suddenly that becomes very real. It's like, and presumably that was really part of your deliberations about this, that in some way Coriolanus is a boy who plays with deadly toys.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the two sides of boy too, right? I think if Phidias is calling on a part of Coriolanus he wants to come out. He wants that boy, that's what he connects with, is the boys rolling around in the mud. There's a strategy to that that's not necessarily an insult, but a call to, let me see that side. I don't want to see the politician. I want the boy.
Yeah.
Let's move on to here's a question for Alexis, coming from Brianne in our education department, actually. How were you emotionally affected by the scene where Coriolanus denies you and your family? What was the preparation and evolution of that scene like for you?
Oh gosh, I spent a lot of that play crying, don't I? And that's the sort of peak moment of tears. I think the choice to observe why is she crying all the time, and an essay had gone into the potential of Virgilia being pregnant, but being secretive about it. And we talked about how that could fuel the emotional turmoil instead of writing her off as an emotional woman. How can we actively engage in an inner life that she's going through that would heighten her emotions? and give direct stakes to that. So especially in that last scene, if we've revealed her pregnancy at the beginning and whether she's lost it due to stress or not, the heartbreak at the end of him not being swayed by his wife or his child, but it's his mother who can talk that sense into him. It's horribly heartbreaking, but I think is fascinating on so many levels. You get such a different female relationship with Coriolanus and his mom versus Coriolanus and his wife, and to see how he responds to each of them and their suggestions, whether obviously in the mom's case, in Volumnia's case, it's a more forced maybe suggestions that come out in all of the scenes, whereas Virgilia is always the tender, caring, supportive. So to see again those moments where Virgilia can be strong, to contrast with a lot of the tears, is also empowering, and I think very important for that scale of the female view that you get in this play, because comparatively it is so small. We had 4 females in the entire cast. So I think all of those moments were so integral to show what those relationships and those dynamics are in this quote unquote sort of men's world, because that's what the play was. Again, Robert was so keen to lean in and to lean into that and what that means. It's sexist. It is. Like we're seeing men's locker rooms, and we're seeing all those things that we hear on the news in its toxic or in its like purely emotional way. So how can we contrast that with all of these female interactions? And again, I think the strength that Virgilia has empowers all of the tears that are truly written in, and it makes those choices stronger.
Right.
Well, and Virgilia is very much a character on her own in a way, because the other women in the play, specifically Volumnia and her friend Valeria, they're all kind of gung-ho for this rather militaristic view of life, and it makes me wonder what your character actually saw in Caius Marcius. He seems to represent a lot of stuff that isn't really in your area of interest.
But I think that's the beauty. Like we get to use Virgilia as a tool to soften Coriolanus, to show to show the boy, to show the soft side, that he doesn't get those tender moments with mom. He gets them with his wife. It shows exactly why they chose each other, exactly why.
There was a love there. There was a love there that
a lot about this.
That was, I think, needed for him. And I think at the end, with that moment of him turning her away, I think he's actually telling her, I need to do this. And because to receive that kiss from her at the end is like, oh gosh, I remember this. I love this. I want to remain connected to you. But honey, my love, this is something I got to do. So I think that's what makes it so interesting, is to have this couple of, like, something I talked about the other day was Coriolanus choosing Virgilia for himself. His one choice of free will is choosing his wife. Everything else in his life is decided by his mother, by the military, by the Senate. But the one choice he has is his wife.
And he very much is a guy who did not marry his mother. I mean, she is so different, isn't she?
And she's so angry about it. Like Volumnia is angry about it. I think in a few other essays too, they talk about her wanting Valeria to be Coriolanus's wife potentially, and that's why Valeria is always around. Like she has a bit of that strong will that Volumnia has as well, and that want for that partnership to have happened but didn't, and the great disappointment that is Virgilia and her vulnerability and her softness.
Here's a much less complicated question, a very technical question from a viewer called Lynn. Can you talk about how you play dead how you appear to stop breathing, especially when being filmed in relative close-up. Any tricks to that? Anybody want to jump on that? Take a deep.
Oh, well, I had the great pleasure of being dead on the bed and also behind the footboard, so you couldn't really see my belly going up and down so much. But right after that big fight, the one thing I was trying to do was literally after that fight was, because the adrenaline is going and your breath is going like this, is literally just try and calm down or try and measure your breathing out a little slowly so that you can just bring basically the adrenaline down back to a normal state so you can breathe calmly, as opposed to which would happen right off the bat. But it's not easy sometimes.
There aren't a lot of Shakespeare plays where people die in a very gentle way. Usually, usually the death is followed by some big fight where your heart is racing and the breath is, pumping, and then you have to die. And so, breathing as heavy as you possibly can, and then stop.
Of course, anyone who's ever played Paris in Romeo and Juliet knows the awfulness of having to lie as a corpse through that entire beautiful scene, and you just want to sort of slither off the stage.
Yeah, I remember when I did Polonius a couple of years ago in the Hamlet, Johnny Gode's Hamlet. Thankfully, Anthony had me die behind the bed. So great. All you could see were my legs, so I could breathe as much as I wanted. In fact, I think I fell asleep a couple of times.
Here's a question. It's actually for all of you, but I'm gonna ask it first of Tom and Michael. Do you have a favorite line in the play?
Well, for me, the line that really summed up Sicinius, that character, and what those two tribunes were really after. There's a great question that Sicinius asks in the middle of this big argument: is who is the city but the people? Mm-hmm. And I think that really summed up, what they were after, what they wanted, the representation that they wanted for the people. And also, I just think it's a wonderful question about democracy and community, and how do we make decisions in our cities, in our governments, in our countries. It's a great democratic question, and I always thought that was the core line for my character.
Because I mean, the tribunes are kind of manipulative, and yet they do have a point. I think the first time I encountered the play, I saw the tribunes as the villains of the piece. But the more you see it, the more you think, well,
yeah, I mean, there is a famine going on. They are the voice of the people, and the person that the patricians want to run the country is this incredible soldier who is a hero and does wonderful things on the battlefield, but his solution to the people is to take a sword to them. So, they have a point. This guy might not be the best choice to lead the country, or and best choice for the people.
Michael, I'm going to ask you that same question too. I mean, your character, Cominius, is in some ways, I mean, he's what Coriolanus should be. I mean, he too is a successful military man, but he actually has some grasp of politics, and he kind of knows how to talk to people, and he does not have the faults that Coriolanus has.
He's definitely a company man, and a man that sees that, he doesn't. I think Coriolanus and Cominius are of similar ilk. He doesn't necessarily need to. The one thing that I sort of held on to in that play, because I would always ask myself, Cominius is so horribly unsuccessful at turning his friend to the right side and follow a path. He's not very good at it. But because they know each other, and I think these guys touched on it a little bit when you talked about their relationship of Phidias and Coriolanus. Men that exist and live in those extreme world of combat and life and death, friends dying beside you, understanding that skin to skin thing is something that is can be quite a powerful bond for men. And for Cominius, I think he's figured out a way of removing himself from that, whereas for Coriolanus, not so much, at least in my mind. So it's a support of a friend, a deep support of a friend, while watching him go down this horrible path. I'm totally going off topic in your question. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's good. Let me narrow it down. Do you have a favorite line?
Yeah, it's funny because you'd think like one of my favorite lines would be from my good friend in the play, but it was always a lot of Coriolanus's speeches. I don't have a favorite line from the play. I can't think of one that I immediately connect to, because while doing that show, I tried to connect to my friend and try to filter and hear him in such a specific way, so that I never was. For Michael Blake, I was always like, God, this guy just doesn't listen to me. But for Cominius, I constantly had to be like, state like this guy. This means like he's onto something that even I don't see, maybe. And I had to reduce my way of thinking to connect to this man that I thought could be the best leader for this country. So, you know, his sense of Coriolanus's sense of them not knowing how the world really is, for all of the things that you have. I can't think of if you can think of one, Andre, please help me out, or anyone else. But like where he would speak about, you don't know what it's like to have the freedoms that you have here. Mm. He would refer to that quite a bit, and I think that was something that Cominius always. I can't think of one specifically, but one that I would always hook into, to be like, yes, you don't understand what what this world is like, and enjoy it and embrace and be thankful for the things that we've given you. Or
Michael, Andre probably remembers Andre and Alexis and I went down to Dartmouth University and spoke to some classes, and one of them was a military history class, and afterwards we had a great opportunity to speak to some veterans. American veterans of Vietnam and Iraq, just one-on-one about their reactions to this play. So just to pick up on what Michael's talking about, they really delved into the psychology of the military mentality in that play. It was really fascinating for us to listen.
Yeah.
Anybody else got a favorite line they want to leap in with?
Well, I have one. Like, it's after everything's said and done, after Mom has left, and it's actually one that was cut, because Robert wanted to leave some mystery in regards to what Coriolanus would do. But after, "Oh, mother, mother, what have you done?" something that he says is, "Most mortally have you prevailed with your son, but let it come." So he knows he's going to Rome to make a peace, but he also knows he has to return to Antium with this peace. And whatever happens, happens. It could cost him his life, but he's going to walk into it head first, basically. But let it come was one of those things that I really hung on to, even though we didn't have it. But it was just my own little secret inside of knowing what he is walking into, which is probably his death.
One time he tries to be a politician.
Mm. Here are two separate questions that I might relate together. One question is, the cast was so involved in the process from the start that it must have been hard for the understudies. Did you make it through the run without understudies? And I will link that to another question earlier on, which I've lost now, but the question was, did anyone ever trip over anything or fall over anything backstage with all the technical stuff going on? So did break a leg ever come physically true?
We had some people hurt crew-wise every once in a while.
Our amazing poor crew, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I think some ribs were broken at one point, weren't they?
Oh my God, right? Yes.
I had a moment, well, right after the big forum event, after the screen closes, I have to literally bolt it to off stage and back around for going door to door as Coriolanus goes door to door. And we had one of our crew people step forward a little too early, and I ran full on into her. And luckily, I used to play rugby, so my first reaction going into contact is wrapping. So I literally went full speed into her, but also caught her at the same time, did a full kind of rotation, put her down and said, sorry, and then kept on going. So there was this is why we're talking about, like, the traffic backstage was so particular. Like, you're in the wrong place at the wrong second, you could get hurt by something coming at you or somebody trying to get off really quickly. So it was literally a magical do-si-do of people in props and giant things coming in and out everywhere.
And our amazing stage managers, and I said, Melissa and Catherine, were on, like, keeping everyone exactly their toes in line so that didn't happen. They were both looking at the stage and at us standing by, they can do that with their multiple amazing hats to keep everyone in line. I guess the danger in understudying is you don't just learn the onstage track, you have to learn your offstage track.
Yeah.
Because it was internally covered, all of our understudies were within our cast. I'm sure if the wrong sort of tier system happened where someone called out and we had to fill in, I'm not sure it would have worked, but it was covered. I understudied the two ladies in the Three Houses scene. So I would have gone from, like, clapping my husband on, like, yay, he's now officially Coriolanus, to, like, greeting him at a door as a random neighbor. Might not have translated, who knows? Luckily it didn't happen, but that would have been a complicated backstage track as well to figure out. I'd have a brand new quick change. I would have to make sure I don't get hit by the oncoming whatever. It would have been messy. I'm trying to think, did anyone call out though?
I don't think so. And what was so unique and so wonderful about this show was that usually, often, there's the actors, they go on, they do their thing on stage, and then the crew takes over and does their thing. Whereas in this production, everybody was working together all the time. And it was really quite enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a light-hearted question. How do actors handle the audience's occasional laughter in Shakespeare's tragedies? Which seems to imply that you should never laugh during a tragedy, which...
But there's a lot of comedy in it. Like, that's what I think keeps people involved in it, is the surprise of laughter and the ridiculous moments that even in the height of these tragedies, you can find a moment to laugh. Like, one moment is with Coriolanus and his mother in the living room scene, where she literally beats him in front of his friends, like his commander, and basically this guy who's practically been like a father figure to him, Cominius, and to have his mother beat him in front of them, and then to storm off in a huff and make him into a little boy, and people literally seeing the son, the little boy, and the mother putting his son in place.
That was funny about doing that scene, because as time went on, Tom McCamus and I were witness to all of that in that scene, and we would like, and the wonderful thing about Stratford, you have lots of time to really soak in these scenes. And, you know, by October, we had a full on, after she would beat you, we would have a slow burn of looking at each other of like, can we just see that? And it just became a thing between us. That was, that I think the audience then recognized, and was always fun to sort of not lean in it too much, but like, what would you do in a moment like that where you're watching something so personal and domestic happening, and you're there on official business? You know, those things happen. It's also like one of those wonderful moments where we were in rehearsal, and you know, Cominius, for example, is you know, he comes in with a lot of exposition throughout the play. He's telling you what just happened, and he comes in and he's constantly reporting about what you haven't seen. And we had those wonderful bar scenes that he created, and I'm talking from day one. Robert had that sort of elevator bar music playing just to create the environment for you and whatnot. And I remember one day I jokingly was like, I did the scene a little boozy, and he was like, "Oh, keep that." And then that's where that last scene where you see Cominius really drunk talking about how much this is all going to fall apart for Rome uh came about. And it was just getting back to how great and open Robert was. And it was a playful scene at first. He wanted it to be sort of, he was like, go further, like get really drunk, like get really sloppy. And we played with that until we found the place of like, the danger was there and the sloppy, drunken comedy was there, and the pathos of all of that as well. So anyway.
I always think too that Shakespeare, I think he liked his tragedies funny and his comedies sad. Because, you know, because I think Hamlet is there's a lot of humor in Hamlet, and Twelfth Night is incredibly melancholic and sad. So I think he had this great ability to have these two things coming up against each other, the comedy and the tragedy, and they would highlight each other. You know,
right? You know, some of Robert's choices were quite remarkable. You mentioned the bar, you know, which was a wonderful device, and the news reports coming in through the TV that we couldn't see. But I was always particularly struck by that restaurant scene. The idea that, you know, if you read the play and you figure, okay, Volumnia is berating the tribunes in a square somewhere outside, and it's in a restaurant, and it's also hushed. And then she has that wonderful line about, and I've forgotten what it is, but it's like they offer her the menu, and she says, "Angers my meat."
Angers my meat.
It's just such a brilliant kind of, you know. I was amazed by that all the way through, the way those modern voices kind of resonated with the text. I mean, do you guys feel that too?
Absolutely. In the public versus private scenes. I love that he said it in a restaurant, because it should be in this public tense. It adds tension to that scene. It's in a public space. It's not in a private space. And what does that mean? And what does that mean then for the onlookers? Like, where does that tension lead to? I love that choice.
Yeah. And what was so enjoyable was that Robert would set these scenes in places that were so recognizable to an audience that so much of the work was done for you. So much of the story was already told. You know, the bar scenes, the restaurant scenes. As soon as you see that, as soon as an audience would see that setting, there's already so much information going on, and because they recognize what it is to see three politicians speaking in a bar, or a public fight happening inside of a restaurant. So much is done for you as far as the storytelling that it really made, for me anyway, made my job a lot easier.
Of course, it's always interesting in theater. Theater by its nature is the private forced public, you know? So when you put that microcosm into a play, when you have a scene that's supposed to be private, forced public, it creates interesting tension, right? You think of the trial scene in Winter's Tale, it's a domestic debate in a public environment. It's always engaging.
another to me, and this is I guess a question for Andre, but other people jump in. One of the key moments for me in that play, and it's with it's after it's in the Roman camp, which in this production they're all kind of bleeding and they're cleaning up at the sink and so on. And Cominius is trying to get Coriolanus to accept praise, and he won't. And then he says, "Okay, I do have one thing. There was a guy in Coriolis who I know who was taken prisoner. Could you make sure he's looked after?" And Cominius, you say, "Yeah, sure. What's his name?" And he can't remember the guy's name. To me, that is sort of the key to Coriolanus, isn't it? Well, one of the keys, that he just doesn't get it. He doesn't get the human touch at all.
Well, I think that's partly because while he's in battle, if anybody's ever played sports, like I as I was saying, like playing rugby was interesting for me, where you could be having an okay game until somebody hits you the wrong way, and then the other guy comes out. Now, and the other guy is like the Hulk. Let's call him the Hulk. And I think Coriolanus is used to working in the Hulk sort of area in his brain mostly. And then in the locker room is when he's going back to Bruce Banner, so to actually try and remember what you did in the height of adrenaline is easy to forget. What did I actually do? How many people did I kill? I know there was a lot. I couldn't tell you how many though. So there's something about him being used to navigating that level of adrenaline and finding this guy who helped him out for a hot second. He's like, thank you. But then going back into battle, there's something about the level in which he navigates his world at, that once he comes back to what normal is, it's hard to remember what happened in his heightened state of adrenaline. So I think that's where that disconnect happens for him in regards to whatever his reality is.
We wanted to play with that PTSD as well. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. We also were sort of leaning into the post-traumatic stress disorder as well, that the tail of that scene and the cost of that, the human cost of that, and has that affected Coriolanus's psyche, and do I recognize that? There was a lot of wonderful questions that sort of came out of that that bizarre scene. I remember when it was first pitched to us, it was like a locker room scene, and it was I remember there was like, when we first started playing with it, there was like equipment and stuff in the room and weapons, and it was. You remember that?
Yeah.
And if I didn't know how to, we had to really figure out how to build that world for each other, so it didn't become pedestrian. That it had value. That it had. Because I'm also naming you the name of the play as well, you know? And so there was the weight of that. I think it came about though, ultimately.
Yeah, definitely.
We have a question here, which may have to be our last question. And it's referring back to a previous Q&A, I think, and it's directed to Graham. It seems you said that there's something you said in the past at a Q&A about.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. Back to haunt you. Something about young Marcius, Coriolanus' son. Could you share again your views about Coriolanus' son? Is this ringing a bell?
Your secret, Graham. Your secret.
I could say I don't. I don't recall, although it was probably very astute. And
I think it's your secret. Your secret inside about why you're doing all this stuff. I think that's what they're talking about.
My secret inside. I don't know, other than perhaps what we touched on earlier, and that is these children in Shakespeare's plays become very interesting and fascinating. The lack of children and the presence of children, not in that often, but you often see young boys in these plays, and you know, I guess for me that what I referred to earlier, that desire to revert back to something inside these men that was, you know, wholesome, was chasing gilded butterflies and playing in fields, you know, before the world got complicated and with politicians. So I don't remember what that one was specifically. I certainly didn't play a boy, although I did play a couple boys in my early Stratford days as a 10-year-old forest gnome. Maybe that was it as well. But I don't know. But I you know, I think children become fascinating, and both Alexis and Andre alluded to this too. That you know, it's interesting to see children in the face of adults in these plays, I guess.
Well, I think because I remember it was a Q&A that we did once where you said that I think Phidias has your secret for Phidias was that he had a son.
Oh yes, sorry, thank you, Andre. I knew you would that was yes. Okay, yes, sorry. I think Phidias lost his child in an early battle. I think when you have that scene when he's at the window looking down at the parade, and he speaks at the end about widowing many in this city who have been widowed and unchilded by this man. For me, one of the locks in, and it came very late on my second go at a character deep into rehearsal, was that I think he lost his own child to this man, and that's a drive for him. That's the gap, and really, in the end, when he says, "My rage is gone and I'm struck with sorrow," that was the well up for me. When the rage went away, the sorrow and the loss of his child welled up, you know, and maybe as a parent, if we went past that final moment of the play, he can finally deal with that, because he put it somewhere, he put it into rage. And so that phase of sorrow will, you know, maybe there's a second play called Phidias. I don't know.
There's something neat too. We talked about that bare stage that the curtain call happens on, but that's also where our son stages out the battle. And it's sort of fascinating that the only person who breaks that screen threshold is a child.
Yeah. You see it beautifully in the Scottish play, as Michael knows full well, and people will see when that is mounted, is that man, you know, saying he has no child. I mean, these things become reasons for action or reasons for lack of action in Shakespeare plays, whether they're present or not. They become beautiful backstories, and not unlike Alexis, you know, creating that story about the pregnancy. Children and progeny become reasons for doing things as they do in life.
That is so fascinating. Thank you so much. I guess we are out of time. I'm so sorry. We could have gone on a lot longer here, but I guess they are telling me to wrap it up. I want to thank all of you guys for being part of this. Tom, Alexis, Graham, Andre, Michael. To those of you out there watching, thank you for logging in. We'll be back same time next week when we'll be talking about the Scottish play, I think, whatever's next. So in the meantime, thank you for being here. Thank you guys, and keep logging on to Watch at Home for more Stratford Festival content. That's it for now.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.